you said buy 80% silver and 20% gold. And why is that the right ratio?
In America, is the only ones that were taking silver serious. I'm surprised. If we hear more about China, they couldn't own gold from 1949 to 2002, but there was never a law against them not owning silver. So they got to keep silver. Exactly what happened in the United States. So there you go. That's what makes gold so much more demanded, is because we've lost the rights in both this country and China and other countries at times in the nation's history. So 100 years ago, gold was only worth 16 to 20 times more than an ounce of silver. To simplify that, if an ounce of silver is $1, then an ounce of gold was $16 to $20 an ounce. Today, it's 100 to 1. Gold is 100 times more valuable than silver. But I showed you in that illustration, silver is still outperforming inflation by over 2 times. So it's performing twice better than anybody expected it to, but it's out of ratio with gold by 100 times. So if we're doing 80% of silver, which one of these two has got to catch up to the other? It's silver eventually has to get back into ratio with gold because it's a monetary asset. So whether they go to physical commodity currencies worldwide, which half the world's already on it, it's called BRICS. If our country does it, we have to true up silver. It has more room to grow. It could be 1910, 1920, 1930. But houses were literally between $10,000 and $30,000. So let's say you're in St. Paul, Minnesota, and there is a phenomenal street called Grand Avenue or Summit Avenue. This would be the governor's mansion. These are beautiful marble interior mansions, stone pillars, things of that nature. Today, those houses are probably worth $2 to $10 million. So that would have been a $30,000 house back in 1920. And if you were to sell it, so if you were selling it for $30,000, you had a choice of accepting currency or coin. If you were to receive gold coins, you would divide 30,000 by $20, and you would have 1,500 ounces of gold. Now we know $30,000 today barely costs, that covers the realtors and the closing costs, and that's about it. But now 1,500 ounces today, $3,300. Oh, this is wild. $4,950,000. So gold and housing went equal in 100 years.
This is so good. Had you taken 1,500 ounces of gold coins back then, that house would be worth $4.95 million. Well, an ounce of gold is worth $3,300 today. So why is that coin not worth $3,300? Where does the value come from? Okay, welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today I got a little interesting and fun topic. One of the most interesting conversations I had in the entire last month. And when I was listening to Eric and his partners, I was like, what are you doing? And it has big question marks. If you can imagine one of those cartoons with big question marks all over your head, you just want to figure out like, hey, how do I learn this? How do I apply this towards housing? How do I apply this towards as an investor? And again, we're not giving any investment advice today. We're not soliciting any investments. I just want to explore this topic because it's so interesting and I really want my own kids to understand this topic. So, Eric Harmon, welcome to the podcast today. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Ken. How are you?
Man, I am fantastic. I'm in sunny San Diego today. It's a great day to be alive. That's all I can say, right?
It's good to see you.
Man, Eric, so I know you as the coin expert, if I even want to coin it that, but you just have this very wide breadth of knowledge around alternative assets, what's going on in the world, how to diversify your risk. And I wanted to bring you on today because I really want to share this knowledge with the world, because sometimes when we are in real estate, all we do is have this narrow mindset towards real estate. And that's the be all end all. But there's so much more to the world. So Eric, for people that don't know you, who's Eric? How did you get into this world in the first place?
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Eric Harmon. I work for Preferred Coin Exchange in Hudson, Wisconsin. We're Midwest folks. I got into the business basically from low-level collecting, and I actually made a mistake my first year in college. So upon learning about art and history, which was my compassion at the time, or passion, I started learning about the value of some of these collectibles, and it took me all the way to hedge funds on this alternative asset category. It blew my mind and has continued to do so for over 2 decades. So it's a lot of fun to share with folks that aren't even aware of the market.
Okay, well, I like to try to keep things super simple, right? So when my daughter is going to be in 5th grade, right? Eric, how do you even explain what you do to like a 5th grader? Let's try to keep it simple. What do you think?
Well, I am going to think like a 5th grader. I remember, and I'm not exactly sure how young I was at the time, but I was pretty young, 7, 8 years old. And my grandmother would tape Eisenhower dollars. They weren't silver dollars. They were dollar coins, very large, very heavy from the 1970s. They had replaced what was famously known as the Morgan silver dollar, which had silver in it from previous years. But I remember getting a birthday card in June, school's out, and this card was the heaviest card I ever received in the mail. Now, I'm also younger and smaller, so it felt like a ton of bricks. When I opened the card and saw a 1974 Eisenhower dollar coin taped to the card and pulled it out, it was the heaviest, most impressive thing I had ever seen in my life, which led me to going straight to Grandma, asking her what this was. Now, keep in mind, at the time, I'm 7, 8 years old, so I haven't really seen a dollar yet, because back in my time, a dollar was quite powerful. And that's what have happened in the very early 1980s, where I was 7, 8 years old, back when the dollar was.
Don't worry. I can't do math. Don't worry. So you got that coin and you open it up and you're like, whoa, what is this? How much is it worth? Like, what can I do with it? And what happened then?
So, yeah, I started asking her questions, and she said that it was the spendable version of what my grandfather was going to eventually give me when I was older. And what she referred to that I didn't understand at the time, probably for the next 15 years I didn't understand, because it was about 19 years old where I realized I had made a significant mistake. So going back, she said these were meant to go get something special on my birthday, which we had an A&W drive-in restaurant up the road. I eventually worked there, but we could go buy ice cream, and you couldn't really get much more at the time with the dollar. But anyway, the other flip side to that was whatever Grandpa was going to give me later in life, I was not to spend that one. And that's kind of where it started. So what was special about it is the coin, the date on it was my birth year. So it meant more than just a coin to me. And I know in the industry, it is very common for anybody I've ever met to remember the day they picked up a silver dollar for the very first time. And it's mostly because of the size and the weight. But it kind of flashes your mind, and many things go through your mind once you hold something like that. You'll never forget it.
That's interesting. So now that I kind of understand your first inspiration, great story, by the way. And I mean, I can just imagine feeling that weight of that coin in my hand, and that just changes your perspective of what value is, right? Because sometimes we just see digital values in our credit cards, in our bank accounts, etc. But Eric, let's talk about the problems that you're solving for folks, right? And I want to try to make it as relatable as possible for investors, developers, because I mean, why do people come to you to buy or hold or store value in coins? Like, why are they coming to you?
So for most of our life, and this depends on where you are in the world, like if you are a resident of the United States, and this isn't picking on bank or government, they really want us in paper, and they want us in things that allow us to show faith in their leadership. So they don't really teach about this. And like I said, when I got into this from making a mistake, which led to the collecting part, which I focused on art and design first. But when I started learning about the real value, this is what ultimately changed my life forever. And it's a continuous pursuit. And what it really leads to is I had no idea that something that I loved in art and design would become the most sound money in my life. And that's where I focus on today. And so what's really cool is no matter what you tip your hat to in the last 4 or 5 years, the world has finally been educated. They have taken the key to the vault and opened it and shown us this side of true value and true wealth. And so the industry is really wild, and it is confusing at first. But this is why there are educators like us that our passion is getting out there and simplifying this. And there's really only three categories, main categories when it comes to coins, whether they're precious metal or mixed with other various metals. And maybe we get the chance to get into that today.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I think it's very important, right? Again, I'm asking from the perspective of how do I teach my kids this, right? Because I think when we apply that level of care, that's how we have the best conversations, because we're so intent on trying to educate and share with our kids that there are two sides of this world all the time. And I don't want my kids to ever say, hey, it's always just paper dollar thing. We got to open and expand our mindsets to be open that there's some other store of value out there. So let's talk about the three types.
Yeah, the three types. And then I want to tell a little story about us as kids, because this is how you can relate it to kids. So the three basic types. In this one, I do want to hone in to government issued coins, and I can expand on it to get into bars and rounds and privately minted things. But I want to keep it nice and simple. So in government issued coins, and you wouldn't believe it, but most nations have and regulate government issued coins. They don't always strike them. There are real private mints in England and in Germany, for example, and in China that will mint legal tender coins for nations that are smaller. But it's basically like this. So in the United States, we have the biggest government governing powerful U.S. minting process. There are multiple mints. And what they strike is, we call them business strike. So they strike three different types of coins. They strike for the folks that want to own precious metal. And why would they buy it in a government issued coin? Because you have a government behind it and you can trust the weight and purity, which leads you to the precise value at any given time on what you have in your hand. Then there's a huge market. I would say this is 85% of the entire coin market is collectible coins. And they have a low end all the way up to a high end. Then there's a small portion of, and this word is really confusing, it's called numismatics. And they call people that are scholars in coins numismatists. But we that have been in the business for a long time apply the word numismatics to the highest, finest caliber of rare government issued coins. And that is where the sound investing takes place. And believe it or not, there are major institutions all over this nation that are financially backed in the form of a hedge fund by massive coin collections. So you have coins that satisfy owning precious metal versus a fiat currency, collectibles, which we can stay out of. That's how I got into this. And then the investment part, which is called numismatics.
Okay. So you briefly hinted at, well, let's go into the story. I want to make sure I tell the
okay,
story.
So this is how we relate this to children. And it is so fascinating and fun because I have yet to know any child in any generation. I'm a Generation X. I can tell you the movies that inspired our lives in a second, but we are all born to be treasure hunters, and we are all introduced, most of the world, to shows like Disney and things like that, where we're fascinated with kings, queens, princesses, and really coins 100 years ago, all the way back to 650 BC, was the hobby of kings, queens, dignitaries, presidents, and folks of that nature. It was their hobby. It was sound money. The civilians of the world never really had access to it unless it was the currency and they used precious metal. So that fascination for children is the treasure hunting that's born in them. For me, it was the movie Goonies, Stand By Me, all those kinds of things where kids kind of break away from the house and they venture out and go on these little treasure hunts. But then when we stay home and turn on the movies, we all get fascinated in royalty and things of that nature.
Okay, so obviously we're not talking about the pennies and the quarters, right? When we talk about collectibles and stuff like that, right, Eric? So we're not going to get into the collectibles, but you said that was 85% of the entire market, right?
Yes. Yep. That is the toughest part of the market because I just know this. And we just went through, I don't know if you guys want to refer to what we just went through. It's kind of a recession. So then we can definitely target the 2008 recession. And what I saw at that time was a lot of people and things changed dramatically. We didn't have visibility back then. But back in 2008, people were finally in fear of holding the US dollar, whether it was at home in envelopes or at the bank in the form of a bank account. They were losing faith in the US dollar because, and that's so funny to think today in 2025, but back then in 2008, we were thinking the dollar was shrinking really bad. My gosh, look what's happened in the last 5 years. So anyway, people were trying to buy precious metals is what they were after, but they were landing in front of big companies that whenever there's huge demand, there's small supply. And when there's small supply in the coin industry, when these major big companies cannot get their hands on volume in precious metal, they have to start grading these coins and selling them as collectibles to make up for the difference in profit that their company is expected to do annually. So a lot of people end up with the wrong kinds of coins. And that's why that 85% of the whole market is collectibles. Collecting is also a big thing in the US. And I can speak on that a little bit where it stems from. But today, the last couple of years, people now are feeling confident about the right to own precious metals because they want to rely on themselves today more than they want to rely on an institution, a government, or even other individuals. So it's shifted quite a bit. And I would say more people are knowledgeable about sound money today than I've ever seen in all of lifetime.
Okay, let me ask you some questions
Yes.
because I always try to draw analogies and say it back to people to make sure I'm understanding, right? So
Yep.
sometimes when companies, they do business internationally, there is foreign exchange risk, right? Because what they sell today in dollar, maybe it devalues against the yen, devalues against the euro, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
And so they invest in some of the currencies there to try to offset and smooth out the predictability of the value of the revenue so that they don't lose necessarily on just foreign exchange devaluation. When people are collecting coins, is that the same concept that they want to hold some in coins so that they have some predictability in the value of their assets on the balance sheet? Is that what they're trying to solve? What do you think?
That's a great question because I never thought of it. Ken, you really nailed a good question here that nobody's ever brought up. And when I think about this, and the reason why you kind of caught me off guard is this is a way to neutralize that. Anything alternative, asset wise, because it's physical, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's limited, and so it has value, but that kind of equals out all these currencies because I do know this. I do a lot of presentations in all of these investment conferences throughout the country. I'll name them if you ask. But anyway, people always want me to talk about and educate them on fiat currency versus precious metals. And what's happened the last couple of years is we are realizing how weaponized the US dollar is. They call it a petrodollar. And if we're not in agreement to one of these other 209 nations, we raise our value and lower their currency.
Correct.
And it's kind of like a power move and it's weaponized. And we don't like it now that we've realized it. But when those folks, no matter what country you're living in, whether you're in the US, China, Canada, Europe, if you got rid of your fiat currency and had precious metals instead of it, and then there's options of storing it, whether it's at home or in a safety deposit box or things like that. But now you can go trade it into your own currency or another currency, and it's an equal value because it's precious metal.
And I didn't mean to come up with just some random analogy because I always
that was amazing.
How do I come up with how do I draw parallels to what sometimes I understand what companies are doing in my own head? And the principle is almost the same, right? The goal is almost the same. It's like you want some more predictability instead of just relying on the government's promise that, hey, $1 is worth $1 because if you use this dollar to go buy a candy bar, somebody person will give you that candy bar for that dollar. That's what I was trying to understand. Like, hey, with these coins and how you're storing value. So I think you and I are on the same page. Like we understood that pretty much the same. Like that's just hedging the value of whatever your assets are.
Yeah, and you guys, we have a million examples just to kind of paint the picture properly for everybody. And this is literally equal with housing and property. So watch this. This one gets everybody's attention. Now, it looks like a long time span, 55 years, but we can shrink it and show this in any way, shape, or form as well. But I'm going to go back to 1970. Gas was 20 cents a gallon. And you had an ounce, let's say you had a silver dollar in your hand and a paper dollar bill. Both of them in 1970 bought 5 gallons of gas. Today, a dollar is, depending on where you at, I'm in the Midwest, so we're about $3 a gallon, $3.19. So we'll just round down to $3 to make the dollar look strong. We're buying a third of a gallon of gas with a dollar bill. But guess what? Silver's at $33 an ounce. That is 11 gallons of gas. So it outperformed inflation by over 2 times.
Wow.
The same piece of money equal in 1970. And get this, folks, silver in 1980 and 2011 hit $50 an ounce. It's not even back to where it's been more than once in modern history. So people think it's an asset that's way out of range with gold, and we'll get into that later. It's not. It's outperforming inflation by more than double. And that's where you start the sound money conversation right there. And growing wealth, that's the numismatic side. But here, I'm wearing a suit today. 100 years ago, with an ounce of gold, you could buy the finest suit money could buy, and that was only $20, believe it or not, 1930. Today, that ounce of gold is worth $3,300. You're buying the finest suit money can buy. Yes, you can buy a $10,000 suit if you want to, or a $300 one. But if you want the finest suit money can buy, $3,300, that ounce of gold still does it. But guess what? The $20 bill, if you were to pay tax on that suit, you wouldn't even cover the tax. Even in innocent Midwest where taxes are lower.
Wow.
And that gets people's attention immediately right there. And it's mind-blowing. And I do the analogy with a house.
Yeah, tell me your analogy. I love analogies.
Yeah, okay. So this is wild. 1910. It could be 1910, 1920, 1930. But houses, and honestly, they were literally between $10,000 and $30,000. So let's say you're in St. Paul, Minnesota, and there is a phenomenal street called Grand Avenue or Summit Avenue. This would be the governor's mansion. These are beautiful marble interior mansions, stone pillars, things of that nature. Today, those houses are probably worth $2 to $10 million. So that would have been a $30,000 house back in 1920. And if you were to sell it, you would have had, 10,000. Let me get some math going here. You had a choice. If you were selling it for $30,000, you had a choice of accepting currency or coin. If you were to receive gold coins, you would divide 30,000 by $20, and you would have 1,500 ounces of gold. Now, we know $30,000 today barely costs, that covers the realtors and the closing costs, and that's about it. But now, 1,500 ounces today, $3,300. Oh, this is wild. $4,950,000. So gold and housing went equal in 100 years.
This is so good. So I got to pause you there, Eric, because in real estate, a lot of folks talk about, hey, the best hedge against inflation is to buy a house and hope that it appreciates and hope that the rent appreciates so that you can theoretically fight against inflation. But they argue the opposite, not even opposite, but just the alternative view of what if you accepted that in gold coins? And this is really the lesson that I really want my kids to understand. Like, it's not sometimes if you only listen to one side of the story, puts you on blinders and you forget how else do other people look at assets and store value. And this was a great example of, had you taken 1,500 ounces of gold coins back then, that house would be worth $4.95 million. That is ridiculous. That's almost, it just blows my mind as you were doing that example and I was doing it on my own calculator. I was like, oh, wow. No one has ever offered me that perspective before.
No.
And that's why I want to bring it forward today. That's why I want to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, and that's why I'm honored to be here because just remember, I learned about the collectible side first, but you guys, I just finished 7.5 years of college and I'm lost when I graduated. I was supposed to be a teacher. So I love teaching adults about money today. But the wild thing is when I started learning about the value of the mistake I made, it leveled my mind more than the art and the stories behind the coins. See, the coin itself, when it's government regulated and issued, they're showcasing the most beautiful things of the nation. So the United States, for example, they showcase the citizens of this country by eagles and buffaloes, and Lady Liberty is our main symbol. If you are in China, it is lunar animals and pandas, and it's the Temple of Heaven. On some of their commemorative coins, it's the Great Wall of China. If you're in Australia, they are a Commonwealth of Nations of England, so they have the hierarchy, whether it was Queen Elizabeth or the new king. And then Canada, for example, maple leaf represents the people of the country. So that's what I talk about, the symbolatry. But on some of these coins, they're showing off the bounty of the country. When the U.S. became a new nation, they were showing off wheat, corn, things of that nature, a great international trade, ways to lure other countries into doing, international business.
Okay. All right. Well, this is. I'm just so fascinated by this conversation now, and we go so many different ways with this. But let's talk about, okay, if people wanted to, let's say, diversify their assets, right? Hold their assets in different types of value. What do people typically come to you for? Like, what is the question they're asking you, Eric? Are they saying, hey, Eric, I want to diversify. I don't want to just hold currency. I want to hold my assets in different store values, such as coins, collectibles, or numismatics. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing correctly.
No, you nailed it.
Is that what they're coming to you for? They're like, hey, I want to diversify my assets. I want to hold some of my assets in the value or the form of coins.
Yes.
What are they coming to you?
So, and it's really fun because I actually slow people down when they come to me. I just had a person this week. This was lovely. This is a very sound individual, an 80-year-old man. So he's seen more than 5 decades of business in the United States. Where he lives today is where he bought his first house over 50 years ago. Wow. He's still married. It just, and the most enjoyable part of his life. But he never had the opportunity. He was in paper assets. He was in physical assets like property and all of that. But he had an inkling to own gold. But when he called me, and he was a referral from a good friend of mine that works in paper assets, and it was his client. And the client asked me right out of the gates, usually I want to educate, but he was sound on what he wanted to do. So he's like, I want gold. Let's not talk about silver, platinum, or palladium. I want gold. Then all I simply asked him is, do you want to preserve your wealth or grow it? And that threw a question mark in his mind. And he's like, what do you mean? Most people, when they want gold, will come for the gold part and think they're investing, and they're not. That's the hedge against fiat currencies. And if you guys don't know, if you've never heard the word fiat, it just means that the currency doesn't have a physical asset backing it. It used to be oil that backs the gold. Oil for some countries, gold for others, and believe it or not, diamonds are physical commodities that could back currencies like Africa, for example. Well, we have been off the standard since 1971. So people want that right to own gold. Now, if they don't need it to grow and it's a stabilizer against inflation and fiat currency, then you're good with just the precious metal. But this gentleman said, I would like it to grow. And so we jumped over into the numismatic category, skipping over collectibles, because that's for people like the old Eric. I'm still collecting, but I'm collecting numismatic coins. I'm compensating the fact that I have children spending my money all the time. Trips, college, graduations, things like that. You don't get that money back, but you don't care because you're investing in your children. But there's a way to grow your wealth so you can continue to do it, which is fun.
Okay. All right. Well, so now he wants to grow his wealth. What do you educate him on then? How do you teach that?
So it's actually pretty simple, because when you're buying gold in the form of a government coin, it's usually referred to as bullion, but it's really called a business strike. And what that means is the governments of the world have a fully automated printing process, meaning there is no human interaction whatsoever. And that's a good thing, because if there was human interaction, there would be a higher cost of production to satisfy the citizens of the nation when they want to buy gold from the government. So we call it a business strike. It's struck once. The coin is not supposed to be pretty in any way, shape, or form. This is an older one, so it kind of has no luster. It's just a silver coin, and it's older, so it patinaed. But then when the mint does collectible coins, like proofs and rare coins, they do get to spend quality time with them. And then look at the difference. I mean, mirror-like background. So anyway, yeah.
You were just holding a silver dollar? Is that what you're holding up?
Yeah, this isn't a legitimate silver dollar, but this is a rivaled American design. This is what we call a trinket. It was privately minted, but it is an ounce of silver. And it was just privately minted to give collectors something that they like in the form of a low-level collectible. This would be a fine example of numismatics. Yes, it's not fair that it was
That's a
gold and the
gold.
other one was silver, but this is a Chinese panda coin from 1995. This is what people would invest in. It was minted. It's funny because in 1995, it was minted as a bullion coin. Then collectors got a hold of it. But because after 90 years in all different world government programs, it became the rarest bullion coin, business strike coin for an ounce of gold. And now it's worth tens of thousands of dollars. It's just wild. Yep. So there's some more things I can talk about, like for those of you that might consider down the road investing in coins. There are some must-have things that we look into, but it's always safer with government issued coins.
Well, because government issued coins, in your words, right? They have a fully automated process so that they know exactly the weight and they know exactly what is in there, right? In terms of purity, I think is the word that you use.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So on this coin, and I apologize, it's on my necklace. I wish I would have had one with me. But anyway, on this, it will have a year, which is on the backside. There's the Temple of Heaven, and it's 1995 towards the bottom. On the other side, it says 1 troy ounce. I'll tell you what that measures in a second. And then they'll either say fine gold, pure gold, or it'll have the purity rate on it. So this one says 0.999 fine gold, 1 troy ounce. Now, what troy ounce? I do want to share this with you guys. Most of us are born and raised to understand medical terms, and that has 28 grams in an ounce. In precious metals, it's 31.1 grams that makes an ounce. So if you were to add that up, there's really only 12 ounces in a troy pound, where a medical pound would be 16 ounces. But it's because there's more grams in a troy ounce. That's all. It all equals out. But that has been the standard for many, many centuries, or many decades, I should say, for precious metal coins or bars or rounds.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a silly question here, right? Because
Yes.
now my daughter's going to be like, okay, well, an ounce of gold is worth $3,300 today. So why is that coin not worth $3,300? Where does the value come from?
Yeah. So this is really cool because I got to tell you, the first 15 years of being into coins, I did not know this. You know, I never even asked about weights or troy ounces until I became a professional advisor in this playground. And then people would ask me. And it's funny because if you're dealing with a 650 BC coin to 1000 AD, nobody ever asks weight and purity because you'll never know it. These things, they weren't regulated well. They were making them by hand. But today, they're fully automated, major governed minting processes. So they are, I mean, they've been this way for over 200 plus years. But in modern era, they make things simple. A lot of people demand pure gold, and they measure them. Most of the nations strike pure gold coins or pure silver coins. 100 years ago, the coins happened to have precious metals in them, but they weren't pure. They didn't measure out to troy ounces. And that's a funny story if we get into it. Our government's been taking advantage of middle class for decades, whether they were conscious about it or subconscious. But if you look at a dollar, a Morgan silver dollar from the early 1900s, it only had 26 grams of 90% silver in it. So the coin said a dollar denomination on it, but it only had 79 cents worth of silver in it. Pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah.
So if you kept the coin for its silver, you had less value than if you used the coin to buy something. And today, if you had, I know, and today it's opposite. Today, you wouldn't dare use that silver dollar to buy $1 worth of product because its power is $33 in silver value. So it changed. But
Got it.
But that's the only reason why. It's not that gold and silver are getting more valuable. It's our currency is getting weaker. That's it. And that took me 2 decades to learn. So when I teach it up front, I mean, that's setting everybody free immediately. Because if that also eliminates people from not wanting to buy it in peak. I got so many people buying it at 3,300. I wish I could have been talking to them last February when it was 1,800 an ounce.
Wow, what a difference.
Yeah, and here's another one, guys. In 2019, it was only $1,200 an ounce. But then in 2011, it was $1,900 an ounce. I mean, It's been manipulated, but the reason why it's over 3,000 today is we think the gloves or the handcuffs have come off, lowering the value of precious metals.
Got it. So that makes a lot of sense. When you explain it that way, it's not that gold is necessarily going up in value, it's that our dollar is worth less and less. That's
correct.
A great anchoring point.
Yes.
And so now let me ask you this, right? As parents, we want to protect our kids. So
absolutely.
How do our kids know what questions to ask to make sure that they're dealing with something that's legitimate, right? The coin either is graded, is they know the purity. Like, what questions should people ask when they're trying to ascertain the value or whatever they're investing in the store value in the form of gold or silver coins?
Perfect. You made that one simple. Just at the end there, that was awesome. Okay, so every parent wants to sit down with their children. The key word is wants to sit down with them as early as possible and teach them about saving. And it can start with saving dolls or saving baseball cards, whatever it is that you can teach them to start saving. Now, when it comes to money, when it eventually gets to that level, this is amazing. I went to college, so I had a lot of influencing books that we were, I'd like to say forced to read, but I was compelled to read them. And one of them was Robert Kiyosaki. And I followed him. And I know anybody in the real estate industry definitely knows who he is. But I know who he is because I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it was really interesting to me because I was raised by blue collar parents that worked very hard and put things away. And they actually did that in the form of alternative assets. And over time became millionaires from investing in alternative assets versus paper. They did a little bit of that as well. But what was wild is when I read that book, it was, well, how do you, break that mold and be able to do more for your children? And anyway, I'll never get this out of my head, but he said something one time on a podcast. He said, if you're saving money in the form of a currency, you are losing. And he said it actually simpler than that. If you're saving, you're losing. And I'm like, is that a parable? Anyway, I also remembered my dad used to put $100 bills in different envelopes at home instead of in the bank. And they would be for projects, whether it was for a new boat in a couple of years or a deck for the cabin or whatever it was, he would do that. And I remember, and he did that since the 80s. So in the most influential time of that dollar getting weaker. So just think about this. My dad puts 10 $100 bills away, doesn't use them for 10 years. He pulls them out in 10 years from now. That $1,000 is now buying $250 worth of stuff. That's what Robert Kiyosaki was talking about. So he said, well, then what's the alternative? Well, you take that $1,000 envelope. It had 10 $100 bills in it. And you just go buy silver with it and get the equivalent with $1,000. Now, in 10 years from now, you pull that out, and now that $1,000, it's not worth $250 now. It's actually worth $2,000. So it grew more than it was when you put it away. That's what he meant. If you're storing wealth or storing money, like savings, if you're saving money for a rainy day or your future, a lot of people don't trust leaving it in banks as much anymore because they've learned some of the deeper contractual agreements that are in these things, that they look at it as an investment, not your own money in the bank. And I won't get into the weeds on that. But if you convert it over to precious metal, now it's growing because our dollar, until it has a physical commodity attached to it, which is the major demand of all world currencies, it will continue to shrink because nobody's stopping any government or institution from printing more of this money out of thin air. That's what makes it grow. Yeah. Supply of currency is growing, but the demand is weakening.
Because now I can try to figure out, oh, hey, maybe when I teach my kid to save, I'm actually teaching her to save like a real gold coin.
Yeah.
Saving, just putting quarters away, right? When that's actually being valued.
Yeah. And folks, think about this. This is really huge because that's what you do when your children are young. What happens when they are starting to focus on their adult years, whether they're going to college, trade school, or going right into the workforce? You're going to start teaching them the importance of owning a home or a property. And the first thing I learned when I came to that part of my life is a property and a home is the greatest bank an individual can own because it's always in demand. Property, you need property to either house people or feed people, farming. So it's always growing in value. And that's really, really cool because you can't help a child buy a house when they're young, but you can give them coins and you can influence them that way to prepare for buying a home. So I got my son right now. He finally said he's 23. He started buying silver 3 years ago. I was shocked because he wasn't listening to anything I was sharing with him. Yep. And then one day he told my wife before I got home that he wanted to buy some silver from dad. So we went out and did that. He only bought 66 ounces, but it was like, it was a lot of money for a 20-year-old at the time. But I looked at that silver and he bought it when it was $12 an ounce. And he tripled his buying power. He hasn't bought any more since then, but his money just grew 3 times. Now, you can't expect that when you're just buying silver and gold. Right. That's the numismatic thing. He just got lucky. He just wanted it to be sound money in his bedroom in a locked little treasure thing rather than in the bank. College would have taught him to put it in a bank and trust our government that it's going to be there when you want to use it. And that when you put it away, it's as powerful as it was when you put it away when you take it out. So,
okay. Well, this is so good. So now that we have examples from even your son doing it, that's the best type of examples, right? It's just
parallels.
Things are caught, not taught.
That's right.
And when like my daughter's going to see this one day, she's going to like, oh, Dad, where's my gold coins, right? She's going to ask that. So as a parent, right, as a investor, when I'm looking to invest in Numismatics, oh, that's so dope. And I hope people really watch this on YouTube. When they are investing, how do they make sure that they're not getting scammed, for lack of better words, right? Because when you buy a diamond, right, sometimes you get it graded on the color to clarity, right? People understand that concept. What is sort of the equivalent to making sure that that coin is what that person says it's in it, what it's made of, and what's the value? How do people get educated on that piece? And what do they need to seek out to ascertain the value of that asset, like they would do maybe for like a diamond, as an example?
So that's an excellent question. And for all of you that are viewing, take this advice and never rush into anything until educated, because you don't have to in this industry anymore. There are people like us that are slowing people down and educating because we know that 5 years from now, when they know more, they're going to wish they could go back in time and make different decisions. So we are angels of the industry for slowing people down and educating them. So the first thing, when you're brand new at this, please start with a government-issued coin, whether it's gold or silver. Silver, later in life, once you've had some experiences, you can get off into the weeds and get name brand bars, ingots, and rounds. But that's once you are gaining knowledge, because at the end of the day, you won't know the difference until you get rid of it. And so these companies that are dealing with you understand that, and it allows them to be looser so they can sell. I hate the word sell. They can sell you anything they want, but I don't like that. That's not a very comfortable feeling for the folks that we're trying to expand. My goal is to educate people, to empower them, to make the market healthier, because it's the greatest piece of money Earth has ever had. And here's why, guys. Oil is a renewable resource. It was classified as a fossil fuel by Rockefeller over 100 years ago. We're learning about that right now, but it is a renewable resource. Unfortunately, diamonds are lab created now, so that has lowered the seriousness of that being a solid asset. But precious metals is still made by God and God only. Human beings have never figured out a way to make precious metals, and that's a great thing. Right there is the number one reason why this is the most sound money. And here's something else for your knowledge and wisdom. This is awesome. So write this down for you viewers. Gold and silver has been a monetary asset since 650 BC. But many people don't realize it still carried value starting 6,000 years ago in religious worship practicing. It was almost any faith had things layered in gold. And there's other reasons why, too. They're antimicrobial, a lot of these precious metals. So they don't attract bacteria, they shed it. There's stories of the cowboys out west when they were settling in western United States. They'd take a silver dollar and throw it into a rain barrel, and it would, I wouldn't say purify the water. It made sure bacteria stayed out of the water, and then all the impurities would settle out at the bottom. That's all they had back then, and they drank the water.
Oh, all right, let me back a little bit. So you said start off with a government issued coin.
Correct.
Where can people get a government issued coin?
Okay, now eBay is super huge. Stay off of it as a buyer. As a seller, a great tool. But the reason why I put a red flag on that when you're newer, the number one thing for eBay is know the seller, not the product itself. Because if the seller is a legitimate coin company, he will back the purchase in the event it's counterfeit or fake precious metal. You need that blanket. So we still need to do business in a traditional manner, which is if you can physically go into a store, meet the people, see the product. And then Numismatics, they grade and authenticate the coins. You don't buy one without that on any level. But I'll get back into that. And then most of these, the biggest bullion houses in the United States have massive, epic websites where you can do transactions through e-commerce. However, you can find folks like us, and I am welcoming anybody to find us for the education part. And if you want us to help you, guide you, and to help you purchase, we can do that. No problem. So government issued coins. And the reason why is because they are changing the laws in the United States. And they just did a huge one 3 years ago. There used to be capital gains tax on precious metals. And there still is, except for the American silver eagles, gold eagles, and gold buffaloes, and the Canadian maple leafs, both in silver and gold. So bars, ingots, rounds, if you are selling lots, you have to report that. In numismatics, you still do not. There's all sorts of, it's really gray in numismatics, but that's why people love alternative assets. It gives them privacy, acquiring and selling. And we'll get into that maybe at a later show. Because Kent and I are going to do these regularly. We respect each other so much. I think you're wonderful, Kent.
Well, this is so good. So I love that there's big bullion houses. Do people go to you to approach those big bullion houses, or maybe that's something they just do on their own?
Yep, because I have an advantage called a vendor's license. And so I can bring the price down a little bit more. Now, what most companies do when they do that is they mark it back up to the competitor's value on it because they have to stay in business. You know, any functioning company has bills. We do it as a convenience. And because it's part of our customer acquisition. We want to meet people all the time, but we want to leave them alone and let them walk on their own pace. When they're ready to find out about a certain area of precious metal, that's when they're going to interpret the wisdom. So we don't just puke information on people because they will not receive it. We walk with them step by step and guide them. So yes, the question is, I have full access to all these big institutions, and we can make it easier because at least you can hold us accountable where you feel kind of out there alone when you're purchasing. And I'll tell you this, it's really scary at the first time because you just gave somebody money and it takes a minute to get your precious metal in return. So the first couple times it's always uneasy. So when people purchase through us, they're adding a layer of protection in addition to the bullion house we're buying from. You cannot buy precious metal bullion directly from the mint. You can buy collectibles directly from the mint because this is high volume, and they hit those 14 major bullion houses heavy. And then from there, those bullion houses distribute to the public or dealers like us.
That's great. I know that. And well, let's just establish your credibility more. How long have you guys been in business for and looking at this stuff on behalf of clients?
Okay, I'd love to give you a simple answer, and I can, but I just got to back up. Brian and I both came from the largest collectible coin company in the world. Brian started this company 10 years ago. I came on board a little over 7. In between, I went to Fidelity because I didn't think Brian Aspen, which is the owner, could have pulled off his mission because his mission was to empower the people in the industry. You're going against the grain because you're unlocking secrets and teaching people how not to make a mistake. There's a lot of companies out there that want you to have a lack of information so the transaction's easier for them, just in case they don't have precisely what you have. I say, if I don't have what you want, I have to go get it or don't expect to do business.
Oh my goodness. So this is so good.
Yes.
So, I mean, typically are people holding like $1,000 in coins? Are they holding millions of dollars in coins? Like, what are you seeing out in the industry that people are doing? And I'm asking this from the perspective of like, hey, what caliber of folks are actually looking into this?
You ask the best questions. We have to do more of these because, folks, the reason why I'm honoring them with these questions is you wouldn't believe how long it takes for people to learn this. It takes people bare minimum 20 years to learn what Kent's asking
Wow.
today. So you guys are learning this immediately. And this is 2.5 decades of visibility, what I'm about to give you. So when people start buying precious metal, it's usually 80-20 rule. 20% gold, 80% silver, especially in the United States. Outside of the country, it used to be just strictly gold, but that just changed in China and India as of last February and March. They're following the footsteps of the United States because gold is limited. It is not, because it was never manufactured by human beings and only by God. It is a limited resource. Okay, so get this. 5 years ago, 2020, and it's changed dramatically because of the lack of faith behind these currencies worldwide. It's not just here. There's a thing called BRICS currency. We'll get into that later. But anyway, okay, you've heard the term when you become an adult and you're a successful man or woman. You know, we all reach to have some success early. We're working harder in our 20s and 30s so that we can ease up in our 40s and 50s and enjoy our children and eventually grandchildren, you know, if you have a family. So anyway, to be a 1%er worldwide when it comes to the ownership of precious metals, it was only 60 ounces of silver or 3/4 ounces of gold. That's it. If you had the 3/4 ounces of gold or more, or 60 ounces of silver or more, only 1% of 7.5 billion people in the world had that much of physical asset. That's how much the government and the banking institutions of the world got us to trust paper currencies. That's mind blowing because I have a lot more than that. And I'm a wimp when it comes to how much people really do have. There are people that have hundreds of millions of dollars in gold and silver. So anywhere, to answer your question, anywhere from $30 to tens of millions of dollars. I just was asked the other day because we're opening a $500 million coin company that handles all things precious metals. And somebody asked if we could move $400 million worth of gold by a private family. That's the most I ever heard of in a private sector. But that's just me being granted the right to distribute that much gold. It'll get bigger in life, but other people have moved larger amounts than that. So back to the basics. When you're starting out, get some government issued coins and 80-20. So if you got 10 grand, 2 grand of it's gold, which isn't going to buy you even an ounce, but then the 8 grand is in silver, and that's a good start. Make sure it's government issued coins at first. If you have smaller resources, what people do that are living tight incomes, if you're in your 20s and 30s and you're, you know, got your first house, for example, and it's been a little overwhelming the last couple of years because of taxes and insurance going up, the cost of living going up, just take $30 to $100 biweekly and save it up or start buying just a simple ounce of silver. And you wouldn't believe it, after 2 years, you'll have 60 ounces of silver just like that. So don't feel behind and don't feel like this stuff is too much today, because it ain't. Once you start doing this, you start cost averaging over time. So imagine this. I can't tell you what silver and gold is going to do tomorrow or 5 years from now or 10 years, but there isn't anybody on earth that's not confident anymore about it. But in reality, imagine what you'd accumulate over the next 10 years if you bought an ounce of silver every 2 weeks. That's 26 ounces in 1 year. 26 ounces times 10 years is 260 ounces. You're way better than 1% worldwide for having the physical asset. And here's why you'd want to do that. He who has the gold is king and independent. He who owns currency is slave to bank and government. So how do you want to be? And it's the same thing by owning physical properties. Same thing. That's a bank.
Well, let me ask you this. So you said buy 80% silver and 20% gold. And why is that the right ratio? Is there higher appreciation in silver, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, there is this is great. God, you lead me into the best wisdom for your viewers. Okay, so now I'm going to lose my train of thought.
We care, right? We care about our audience and we care about our kids. So that's why we're doing this.
Yep. So no matter what nationality you are, No matter where you are in the world, all nationalities, all citizens of the United States. I got to hone it into the United States because I can give you visibility of the last 100 years. And the baby boomers, the folks born from 1945 to 65, really pioneered this country to a new level starting in the 80s. So before them, so this would be my great-grandparents and my great-great-grandparents, they just held the silver coins. And you had gold confiscated in the United States. That's another story from 1933 to 1975. And there's a couple other layers to that. But anyway, so our pioneers, our great-grandparents held onto these coins because they thought they were cool. And they had a feeling that precious metal would be of value someday. But they weren't investing in it, they just held it. They were hoarding it. And those coins is what I got when I was a young man from Grandpa in the beginning of the story. And I did make a mistake on those. But when it came to baby boomers, they were demanding silver coins. But in America, it's the only ones that were taking silver serious. I'm surprised if we hear more about China, they couldn't own gold from 1949 to 2002. But there was never a law against them not owning silver. So they got to keep silver. Exactly what happened in the United States. So there you go. That's what makes gold so much more demanded, is because we've lost the rights in both this country and China and other countries at times in the nation's history. So why am I bringing that up? Because 100 years ago, and this from 650 BC to 100 years ago, gold was only worth 16 to 20 times more than an ounce of silver. So to simplify that, if an ounce of silver is $1, then an ounce of gold was $16 to $20 an ounce. And today it's 100 to 1. Gold is 100 times more valuable than silver. But I showed you in that illustration, silver is still outperforming inflation by over 2 times. So it's performing twice better than anybody expected it to, but it's out of ratio with gold by 100 times. So if we're doing 80% of silver, which one of these two has got to catch up to the other? It's silver eventually has to get back into ratio with gold because it's a monetary asset. So whether they go to physical commodity currencies worldwide, which half the world's already on it, it's called BRICS. If our country does it, we have to true up silver. It has more room to grow. Now, there is a backdoor problem. We talked about that house in the early 1900s and selling it for $30,000, which will give you 1,500 ounces of silver or gold. Now there's a storage problem or a logistically heavy problem. If you pick up a 5-ounce bar, a 10-ounce bar, you're never going to forget it. You're never going to forget the first time you pick up an ounce coin. But imagine a 100-ounce bar. Now you're getting heavy. Now we curl them like dumbbells. You get anything bigger than that, and it's hard to move. If you guys have heard of Fort Knox, those bars in there are 400 ounces. They're 27 and a half pounds. You ain't carrying 2 out of that place. Nope. They got to be trained out of there, or heavy-duty trucks that can barely hold any. So that's why people eventually start learning about collectibles and numismatics, is once they get, $100,000 worth of precious metals, it's like, that's fine, I'm storing it, but what if I want to move from point A to point B? Oh my gosh, now I'm dealing with heavy. And I do this all the time. I actually have coins that are so big, you guys, they weigh 10, 11, and 22 pounds, and they're manhole covers. Yep. It's okay to pick up one at a time, but man, 2 of them, I've taken pictures holding 2, and my face was lying about the weight I was holding. I was trying to smile despite the weight of the coins. But it's hard to hide quantity. So then people go preserved, and that's where people get into rare coins. Like this coin here, it would take 10 ounces of gold just to equal it in its rarest form. I'd rather have 1 flying around because it's lighter.
Right, and it's much more maneuverable and much more easy to transport and much more to bring it with you instead of a briefcase of $100 bills even, right?
Yeah, and we can go deeper on another podcast because I want to tell you guys about when we travel. This is so exciting. When you have numismatic coins versus a pile of precious metal, or even precious metal going through an airport TSA, you'd be shocked at the ability to move millions of dollars through the airport. And this is all legal activity, but I mean, it's so awesome to be able to travel with your wealth. Because most things you can't even get access to them. A gold IRA, one of the most solid assets a person could own. but it's in a warehouse, controlled, it's governed, the whole 9 yards. You can never go in there and touch that. Some people used to feel easy about that, but they don't know more, because if you have to get up and go, like we had in Minneapolis a couple of years ago, have travel bags ready to go because people were looting our city. And you had your most important things, and it was wealth, protection, and clothing, just in case you had to boogie, woogie, woogie, and everything else you left behind. So portable wealth was fun to have when you're in uncertain times.
Portable wealth. I think that's just such
Portable
a great
wealth.
concept. You got to be able to
Yes.
carry your money with you whenever you go, because it belongs to you. And sometimes there's no better way for reassurance than to have it in your hands physically. So
Correct. This is a portable equal to housing, properties, things like that. You got to have some of that. You got to have some of this. It's just another form. That's all.
yeah. And I think for everyone listening today, I really want to emphasize like why I brought Eric on, because I think sometimes when we have blinders on, we think that real estate is the be all end all. That's how you grow wealth. That's the only way you grow wealth, is how some people think. But that's why I want to bring Eric on, because I want to share with the audience like what I'm learning every single day and the cool people that I get introduced to, because I care about all of you. I really care about all of you. And I care about my kids, because my kids need to learn this stuff, because if they only absorb one piece of information from one source, they never expand their mindset to figure out, hey, what is out there? How do I stay curious about how other people are thinking about their assets? Because we have to get ourselves in the right room with the right people like Eric and learn as much as possible from them. And I have been, man, I'm so grateful you came on the podcast today, Eric.
I'm honored to be here.
This is
and
so
you're
fun.
just
You had no
amazing.
idea.
So I'm excited, and maybe we can do this again.
Oh, we will. Absolutely.
Yes.
I want to share this episode with other people. I want to get their questions, and I want to bring you back on for a follow-up, because this is just so interesting. It's a world that they don't teach about in high school. They never, not even close.
Yeah. No, never. They want us to lean on them. Now, for all of you viewers and followers of Kent, reach out to him and ask him questions. So when we do another podcast, we can hit those questions with amazing answers and hone this into what you guys want to learn.
Absolutely.
We're here for you.
Well, Eric, for people that want to reach out to you, maybe
Yes.
they want to find out more, like how can they reach out to you?
Okay, so the name of the company is Preferred Coin Exchange. We're in Hudson, Wisconsin, but look up Preferred Coin Exchange. And just in case you can't get these phone numbers, can I give a phone number on here? Or
Yeah,
perfect.
you can give a phone number on here.
I'm going to be pretty crazy on this one. I'm going to give you my hot access line, my business cell line, so you can reach me direct. So my number is 715-410-3159. If you just research Preferred Coin Exchange, you'll see us all over the place. You'll see us in some of these investment conferences as well. And we have done hundreds of presentations that you can catch some of the recordings on those. But we'll be doing them right here. Kent and I are going to continue this and continue to share more with all of you. You're important to us, and thanks for your time.
Man, this has been so fun. All right, guys, make sure you guys go easy on this phone. Check out Preferred Coin Exchange and reach out to Eric. Are you also available by email as well? Do you want people emailing or calling you?
Yes, you can email the best if you wanna dive right in. Just give me a call or text that number. My email is Eric, ERIC at preferredcoinexchange.com. We travel a lot. That's why using that cell number, my office line goes right to the cell. So you can text or call that. It's always with me. We like to be accessible to anybody that's thinking about anything precious metals. Because if it ain't us, you might get the wrong information from somebody else. So we don't care whether you buy from us or not. We care if you have the facts or not.
This has been so fun. I love this, Eric. Man, hey, we're gonna get you back on for the podcast. That's for sure. And Eric, I'm so grateful for your time today. I'm so grateful that you shared your wisdom, your decades of experience with my kids and all the audience's kids, to be honest with you. And I'm glad you were able to break it down so simply and tell people just to relax a little bit, get into it slowly, which is probably the best advice that I've heard.
Slow down.
That tells me you have a good heart. That's right.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say slow to water, fast to speak. So yeah, we will slow it down. We'll equip you and arm you so that you can enjoy this.
All right. This is fun. All right. And
thank you so much.
Out. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate you.
I'll stay in contact. Thank you.